Welcome to the ACS Technical Advisory Board podcast series, where we talk all things tech including data, cyber, AI, blockchain, and Internet of Things. Meet your host, Dr. David Cook, Vice President of the Australian Computer Society's Technical Boards. David is a technology advocate dedicated to advances and progression of computing and human-computer interaction. In today's episode, David will be talking with ACS Artificial Intelligence Committee member, Dr. Mark Pedersen. Join us as we discuss the nexus between safety-critical systems and artificial intelligence, predictive modeling in the health industry, software quality assurance and the reliability and trust of artificial intelligence.
Today, I'm talking with Dr. Mark Pedersen. Mark is the Chief Technical Officer at KJR. He's got an extensive background in AI, safety-critical systems and reliability. And he's the Vice Chair for the National ACS AI and Ethics Committee. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
Mark, let me start with an important question. In terms of where is there a sort of a nexus between safety-critical systems and AI? How is that merging together, and what's that meaning now for the IT community?
Look, I think it's a really important and emerging area. You can already see there's a lot of application of AI in spaces such as healthcare. So it's clearly safety critical when you're looking at things like using AI to assist with diagnosis, whether that's things like breast screening or other kinds of pathology diagnosis, or even things like predictive models of bed occupancy and things like that. Like workforce management is a critical issue in Australia. So getting those sorts of things right, that not even necessarily about prescribing a drug or prescribing anything to a patient, but actually just working out what's the patient journey going to look like. Those things are safety critical. But there's other areas that are still emerging. Obviously, we've got a certain amount of AI enabled in some of the cars that we've got on the roads. But I was last week just at the Australian Safety Systems Conference, and people are considering options like, well, what happens if we put an AI component into an automated train protection system? How do we reason about that? How do we build a safety case around that? So we can see those sorts of, that's not happening yet, but we can see those sorts of things happening.
So I know that when you look back into the health sector, we do see a lot of that predictive modelling, particularly in areas like cancer, where you see someone who's worked out some algorithmic predictive model for, say, histopathology analysis of renal cancer cells and so on. But there's a hesitancy on the medical side of things to accept that as truth, more importantly, because they'll still go out and get annotated proof of whatever that is. I think the reluctance is to accept it in its own right, but really the key is to marry it up, isn't it? So that we're using that as a predictive model, and so that if that means that we make early recognition of cancer and we get to that, we get patients through quicker, then that's what we're looking for.
Exactly right. So I think a lot of the consternation that comes up in those sort of debates about ethics sort of tries to separate or look at AI as separate to human agency rather than seeing these systems as an augmentation of our capabilities. So, if you're a radiologist, it's useful. If you've got to scan through lots and lots of different medical images, it's useful if you've got an assistant that can go, hey, these are the ones that I think are the most important. Have a look at them first. These ones I'm pretty sure I know what they are. Yeah. They're still going to be reviewed. You're not delegating the diagnosis to a machine, but you're getting some prioritization.
Yeah, I think that's great. Let's talk about software quality assurance. I mean, software assurance is important, and again, it's a big part of that safety critical factor. But what do we need to do? What are the key issues, I think, around software quality assurance in Australia?
Look, it's been really interesting. I've been working in this specific sector for more than 25 years, so it's interesting to see how those things have evolved. And again, we had a really interesting conversation at the conference last week around the difference between complicated and complex.
Yes.
And I think over the last 25 years, we have seen IT systems become increasingly complicated We've got layers of legacy systems. So most enterprise organisations in Australia will still have pieces of kit that are 10, 15, 20 years old. They're building things on top of that. They're trying to migrate to the cloud. They can never really quite shift off some of that legacy kit. That makes things complicated. And you need to do a lot of testing around all of those pieces in order to make sure that it's not going to fall over. The challenge with things like AI is that it starts to become more complex. You can't necessarily study all the rules. You don't know what all the rules are going to be. So you've got to take a slightly different approach.
One of the other things that I know is in your wheelhouse is the question of reliability, and I guess and how AI is increasingly forcing us to question some of the things we do.
Yeah.
What are the most important factors there?
I think with reliability, you're right. There is a challenge, and I think this is probably the biggest question that comes up when people consider, how do I test an AI system? Previously, if you've got a hand-coded system, even if it's a complicated one, you can say, well, look, it's not dynamically changing the rule sets that we've put in there. Even if they are responsive to some inputs, you will be able to say, okay, I've tested this. I know how it behaves. If I've tested it thoroughly enough and deploy it, I can expect it to continue to function in that way. The difference that comes up with AI is where you don't necessarily get the same answer. You might get the same kind of answer. Anyone who's played with any of the generative language models, you can ask the same question and you'll get a slightly different answer each time. So how do you test for that? What are the boundaries of what's acceptable, and when does that go off the rails? So there's a change in thinking around how do you test for reliability.
Let's have a chat about the Australian regulatory environment, because obviously we need to work out whether we're meeting the needs of the IT community and in the needs of the community in general. But I'm aware that obviously with things like the mandatory guardrails and the other various things, there's some increased attention onto what the important issues. But I wonder if it's evenly spread across the community, or if there's a lot more work to get that to be a much more prominent factor.
Look, this is we're at a critical juncture, I think. In many ways, people are saying, why all this extra regulation now? Just because of AI, just because we got excited about ChatGPT. In some respects, if we'd thought about the potential risks of cybersecurity or even the impact of, say, social media on our traditional media landscape, I know that's been a conversation nationally around how do you keep funding quality journalism. Those sorts of things, if we'd thought about those risks as those technologies were emerging, we might have had stronger regulation. And now we're trying to put the genie back in the bottle. So there's a case for having appropriate regulation around AI technology, because we are anticipating big social impacts, big economic impacts. But it's important to get that distribution of who's taking responsibility, who bears the brunt of that regulatory compliance. Is it the builder of an AI solution, or is it the person or the organisation that deploys it? There's a bit of shared responsibility there, and it's challenging to work out, how's that going to work in practice.
I guess that there seems to be a difference between the Australian regulatory environment and the rest of the world in terms of the way in just the progress or perhaps the direction in which some of these rules and what we're setting up and what we're not setting up. Could you see a difference between here and the rest of the world?
Look, there are differences. I think, as we sometimes tend to do, we would sit back and wait a little bit to see what everyone else does. And obviously, the EU often regulates strongly, so they have quite prescriptive sort of rules. We've seen that in the past with things like data privacy.
Sure.
And I would say that within Australia, we still haven't really achieved that same sort of level.
Well, we haven't committed, have we?
Yeah, exactly.
We haven't committed to GDPR. We're happy to watch it, but we want to see how it evolves to the next level.
Exactly. I think we are taking a stronger stance. So I think there is a push. I do see a lot of movement, and I congratulate everyone in the industry who's been putting a lot of effort in around the voluntary AI safety standards, the national framework for assurance of AI. Those sorts of things are really laudable efforts, and you can see that we're on a trajectory to build something that puts us on par with particularly our close trading partners, and I think that's really important. I think that there's an effort to be not as prescriptive as the EU, like take a more principle-based approach, which is maybe more flexible rather than writing lots of fine detail into legislation. But yeah, I think there's no time to waste really in terms of trying to work this stuff out, because the technology is moving very quickly anyway, and people are picking up and using it. So it's important to get in there and start doing something.
Yeah, the risks are live and they're dynamic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So my last question for you is, with your sort of crystal ball projection, what's the future of this? What is it that we need to do, maybe that we just aren't putting enough effort into? What could we do? And from an ACS perspective, have we got a role to play in that?
Look, I think from an ACS perspective, there's a big role to play. I think that Australia is on the cusp of, either being part of that AI revolution and that next wave of technology change, and it requires skills. So there's a really critical part to be played around developing the relevant skills within the industry and having that skilled workforce. And that's not just, people in uni. We now have, public servants across the country who have the responsibility. They're being tapped on the shoulder and saying, you're now the responsible AI officer. So there's professional development in that sort of skill set that is really important to uplift at every level, both people entering the workforce and people who are well established. So that skill set piece, I think the ACS is really well positioned for. But I think there's also a lot of lobbying that, conversations to be had around the level of investment. You look at national investment in other parts of the world. You look at Singapore, their investment in, AI safety, what the UK and the US, et cetera, are doing around building critical infrastructure to support this sort of technology. There's a lot more that we could be doing.
Dr. Mark Pedersen, thank you for your time today.
It's a pleasure.
To find out more about how the ACS is powering Australia's technology brilliance, visit us at our website, Facebook or LinkedIn. Want to get involved with the ACS technical boards? Email us at tab@acs.org.au and tell us a bit about yourself. Join us for more thought leadership, ideas and information through our other podcasts on the ACS YouTube, Facebook or on LinkedIn.